Hello, welcome to the Family Tree Italian Genealogy Guide Show. My name's Denise. I'm the communications person over at Lo Schiavo Genealogica, but our most important person is the other lady on the screen. That's Melanie Holtz. She is our owner operator. Hi, Melanie.
Hi, ciao, everybody.
Oh, that's right. Ciao, ciao. I'm laughing at myself because I just got back from an amazing trip to Italy at the time of this taping. And now I'm like always saying ciao and buongiorno and all that kind of stuff. And people are like already rolling their eyes. I haven't been home a week and I can't let go of the ciao and buongiornoing. So there it is. But enough about me. We are going to talk about tips and resources around researching your Italian family tree. Now, we do this every so often. We'll be doing it more regularly because we introduced this new show because we are using Melanie's book, The Family Tree Italian Genealogy Guide, How to Trace Your Family Tree in Italy, to have these conversations. And right now, we're going to be talking about Chapter 4, which is Understanding Italian History. But very quickly, who is Melanie? How long have you been doing this?
I've been doing this almost 20 years. Well, we just passed the 20-year mark.
Congratulations.
Of doing this. And I started as an Italian genealogist and became a certified genealogist in Italian research. And then later started helping people reclaim their citizenship.
Okay, great. All right. So we are going to talk a little bit about Italian history. We are not going to cover the whole magnitude of Italian history today, but some of the sort of top level stuff of information that when you are researching your Italian family tree, you want to have some awareness about. And if you miss anything or if nothing makes sense, two things: you can get the book, which answers this, and you can check out Melanie's Facebook Live the last Friday of every month at 6 p.m. Eastern time, where you have a direct link to Melanie and ask direct questions, or better yet, sign up for a free discovery call. So if you're like, I don't know. Melanie's very friendly. I don't know if you picked up on that right now, but you can set up your discovery call, have a great conversation, and she's gonna give you great information and great guidance. And it's a free discovery call. And you can find all of this on ItalyAncestry.com. All right, we're going to get into the conversation. So this is kind of a funny question, but Melanie, can you share a brief overview of Italy's history?
Yeah, that is broad. But if we're talking about in the context of Italian research, there are mainly three divisions that we have to look at time-wise. So we have after unification, which is after 1860, unification being when Italy became a country, when all the city-states and republics combined to make Italy a country. And then we have the before unification, and record formats and what's available changed. And also there is the, pre-1806 time frame also, when pretty much everything is parish records, notarial, military. It wasn't until 1806 or 1820, depending on the area, that there was civil registration. Interesting. Thanks to Napoleon, which I think we're going to talk about in a few minutes.
Okay, great. It's so interesting. Every time I talk to you, things really start to make more sense to me. And I just had an aha moment of like, oh, now I understand the different jurisdictions. Before there were jurisdictions, it was the church. So having those different buckets, if you will, and understanding the different buckets and the times is critical. I'm hoping we can talk a little bit more specifically about the pre-unification Italy. There was known as, I think, also medieval Italy, I believe you made reference. What what would you see during that time period as far as how, I'm going to use the word categorization, where you would find documents? I don't know if that's the right word.
So in that time period, we had city-states. We're talking medieval up until 1860. Although medieval up until, say, 1583, there's not a whole lot of records, written records, because the only ones, the majority of people who could read and write were monks and priests and the rich. So there's not too many written records prior to that weren't created ecclesiastically by the monks. After 1583, when the first major relevant event for Italian genealogists was the Council of Trent, which was held in the city of Trent in Italy, in the Trentino region. And this is where Catholic leaders met for, I think it was 40 years or so, until they worked out a bunch of new processes for the Catholic Church, including requiring baptismal records, marriage records, and death records be kept throughout Roman Catholicism, not just Italy.
Now, you mentioned his name earlier, but what was Napoleon's influence on early Italy?
So Napoleon was, in addition to his military prowess, he implemented civil registration. So in those areas ruled by France, mainly in the north of Rome, in that time period, he implemented civil registration around 1806 through 1815. And then in the majority of the north, the parish, the church took over registering the vital events until 1860. Although there were certain areas that, in 1850 started it, but in general, it was, through 1860. Those areas in the south at that time were part of the Papal States, in particular on the mainland. They implemented civil registration in 1806 also, and didn't stop. So that you don't have that gap between 1815 and 1860 within the civil registration.
Okay. There was one of the critical times, I guess I should say, in Italian history, known as the Resurgence or the Revival. Why was that an important time, especially in the context of understanding Italian history and doing genealogy and such?
The Risorgimento, which is what they called it, was a time of completely redoing all the processes. So what they were doing is taking all these city-states, their different ways of doing things, record keeping being one of them, laws, a lot of different things, the militaries, and combining them all into a country. And that was not an easy process, because people who lived in Sicily were significantly different than people who were living in Torino and had been under French influence for, a long period of time. In Sicily, they were ruled by pretty much everybody, a couple hundred years by the Spanish, a couple hundred years by the French, the British, the Arabs. So there was such a melting pot with them also. And coming into play with that is creating a national military. And that was a big problem, even up through World War I, is that we had so many people who didn't speak the same language required to do military service. So they're coming into military service, everyone's speaking a different language, and it was really an issue in the Italian military, especially during World War I. And they started to try and group these people from certain areas that speak this particular dialect of, say, Sicilian or Napolitano, into regiments, with someone who came, with a leader who came from that area and could perhaps understand them. So that's all part of the Risorgimento and combining all these different things. It was not easy. It was messy. Sometimes areas were promised this or that, and that never materialized. But it can be really complicated.
And I bet very political.
Very political, yes. Because, in the southern part of Italy, then we had the Kingdom of Naples, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, and then eventually that all became part of Italy.
Yeah. So there was post-unification Italy, was that 1870 to present, roughly?
Roughly, yes.
Yeah, that included Mussolini's fascist rule. What happened during that time period that is of interest in the context of our conversation?
Most of the records changed in the fact that, especially in the civil registration, there are more sections of, say, a birth record that are pre-printed, that are standardized. Instead of having whole records, written out in longhand, the majority will be just kind of fill in the blanks for the important information, and that does make them easier to understand and translate and interpret. Okay. In Mussolini's era, when it was fascist, interestingly, the civil registration also listed the year of the fascist rule in Italy, not just the year of the record.
Oh, interesting.
So you will find, okay, this was in the 13th year of the fascist rule, but this was, I don't know, 1937 or something like that. It's probably about right. It's probably about right. Because Mussolini came into power, I believe, in 1922.
Okay.
Back in my high school years, I don't know why, but I chose to do a report on Benito Mussolini, and he was a fascinating man. But it was really interesting to really delve deeply into his life and what his choices meant to Italy.
Yeah. Is it true you can't find civil birth records for a Sicilian ancestor in 1808?
That is true.
Why is that?
Because civil registration in Sicily didn't start till 1820. So what you're going to find is a baptismal record or a birth and baptismal record. Sometimes baptismal records will also give when the child was born, but not always. So, if it does give both, then I call it a birth and baptismal record, because it gives both pieces of information.
Okay. So let's talk about regional and provincial identities. How important was that to Italians? I mean, how did it impact Italians who immigrated to the U.S.?
I think it's still important. So, in particular, when they were immigrating, they tended to come and settle in conclaves. In New York City, this street was Little Palermo, and this street over here was Little Napoli. And because they had to do the chain migration, whereas you had to have a job or a sponsor that was going to make sure you were financially supported when you came over for at least a year, they did the chain migration. So they're coming over one at a time, or, it's the father, and then it's the firstborn son, secondborn son, then mom and the rest of the kids come over because of that. And they're settling in their conclaves where they've got their own stores. They're selling food that they're familiar with, even when they're in a bigger city like New York.
Okay.
And even now, there is a lot of regionalism. Even now, as far as marrying people from within the same region. Maybe not as much now as there used to be, but there was a time in particular that those, in the North would never deign to marry a Sicilian.
That's like even today.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's so fascinating.
Yeah, and when you find that, it's usually, immigrants that came over, but they faced the language difference. So in one particular project we were working on recently, someone came from the Alto Adige, which is in the north eastern portion, where they spoke a type of Germanic dialect. And that's where the man was from. And the woman was from Agrigento in Sicily.
Oh.
So she spoke a Palermo type of dialect, an ancient dialect from Palermo. And so we had to wonder how they communicated, unless they both learned English in that way, communicated in English.
Wow.
Because it was so different, with different languages, different dialects, and different ways of looking at things. The North was always more industrialized, and the South poor. And you could probably still say the same.
Interesting. We touched on immigration to the U.S. for just a teeny bit. What were some of the reasons why Italians moved to the U.S.?
Some of the main reasons were, one, they were starving. There was no jobs. So they came looking for work. You find these men, they're called birds of passage, and you find them going back and forth 10, 12, 15 times over the years. Well, they'll come to the U.S., they'll work for the season in agriculture, and then they'll go back. And then they'll come the next spring, work the season. Or they come to work on the railroad. They were drawn by a padrone. A padrone was someone who was sent over there to get workers, to get settlers.
Like a recruiter.
Yeah. There were good ones and there were bad ones. Some took advantage of the people who didn't know any better. But there was also good ones who sponsored many, many people in their immigration to the U.S.
Okay. Well, that's all we have for this conversation, but I want to mention that in the book right here, the Family Tree Italian Genealogy Guide, there is a whole list of Italian history books by region that Melanie assembled. Pages 63 and 64, if you already have your book. And as I mentioned, go visit the website, italyancestry.com. You can find this book. I think it's like $20 or something like that. And you can get that. It's a real easy read. You can learn so much about tips and resources and context around genealogy and family tree research. And check out Melanie the last Friday of the month on Facebook for Presto Italia. And like I said, if you have any questions like, oh, I think I had a great grandmother who was Italian, I'd love to research that. Or, I have a mother who was Italian. Do I qualify for Italian dual citizenship? Then you just want to go to the website, sign up for a free discovery call. So it's been a treat, Melanie, as it always is.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody.
Ciao.
Ciao a tutti.